In a world filled with sharks, bears, and killer bees, one man is brave enough to stay indoors to bring you the latest in gaming, movie, and pop culture news. That man is Tom Awesome, and this is the Outside is Overrated podcast.
Hello and welcome to Outside is Overrated Game Club. Today we're wrapping up our discussion of Ghost of Tsushima by Sucker Punch Productions. I'm your host, Tom Sidlogic, and joining me for the discussion today are the Hobby Box, Joe Burns.
Heyo.
And the Hobby Circle, John Munch.
Howdy, howdy.
Outside is Overrated is presented by Premier Health. Check out their website at premierhealth.com. Oh god, I don't edit this. Outside is Overrated is presented by Premier Health. Like I said, check out their website at premierhealthmn.com. That's premierhealthmn, as in Minnesota.com. In this monthly segment, we play a game with our community and invite our Patreon supporters to join the discussion. If you want to join us, support Outside is Overrated on Patreon at www.patreon.com/OiO. You can help for as little as $2 a month. Here's what we're going to discuss today as we wrap up our discussion on Ghost of Tsushima. We're going to give our final thoughts on combat. We're going to talk about the best side content, and then we're going to have a super spoilery discussion on story content. Ghost of Tsushima released in July 2020. I'm playing the Director's Cut, which came out in 2021 and has a Metacritic rating of 87. For the core gameplay loop, you play as Jin Sakai, a samurai on the island of Tsushima. After the Mongol invasion in 1274, you're trying to repel the invaders. You liberate areas, spend skill points, and kill tons of Mongols, bandits, and Ronin. You'll engage in a ton of side content, including climbing challenges, haiku composition, and side stories. We'll start with the combat. Last month, we discussed both the Ghost and the Samurai options. Burns, what changed for you in combat in the back half of this game?
So one of the big things that you get pretty late on into the game is the Ghost stance, which is basically your press in both sticks, do the rage attack, and so it's a neat ability. It's common in games like this. I mean, Final Fantasy 16, God of War had similar things, but I don't know. It's neat that the screen kind of goes black and white, and you basically just destroy three dudes, and you build up the meter by not getting hit in so many or not getting hit and killing so many guys in a certain amount of time, or consecutively. So basically, I think it's 6 unless you wear one of the types of armor, and then it's only 5 kills that you have to get to trigger it without taking a hit.
And if you upgrade that Ghost armor, it goes down even one more. I think it starts at 7, and it can get down to 5 with your upgraded Ghost armor, which is pretty rad. I agree. Ghost stance was awesome.
Yeah, although it made you hate archers even friggin' more, because, Lord, you can't get to those guys and you take a random hit while you're attacking like 2 other dudes. It's just like it completely screwed everything.
Or like you deflect a fire arrow, but you still get pinged by the fire damage and it resets your bar. So what's worse with archers? Messing up your Ghost stance gauge, or them poisoning you constantly in like the final battles of the game? Which one of those two is worse?
Yes. Poison.
The poison.
Super duper irritating. Sorry, Burns, I didn't mean to derail you from what changed in combat for you.
No, that's fine. That all was part of that first topic I had. Another one were the slaughter attacks. I don't know what unlocked it, but at a certain point, maybe it's just like getting higher in your renown or whatever, but you end up having an option when you sneak up on people sometimes. I don't know if they have to actually be in front of anybody, but sometimes you'll get the option, instead of assassinate, it'll be slaughter, and you basically just behead the guy. I don't know, it's fun. It's that samurai power fantasy of just going up and completely chopping off a dude's head, and especially after watching Shogun, I just really want to do that from time to time.
And well, there you go. You're welcome for 2 months of samurai content on Outside is Overrated, Burns. John, what about for you?
Not much changed how I really approach things. All those things, though, like thinking about even that like slaughter mode and this and that, like it really is cool how they play on fear in the back half of the game with combat. They really ramp up how, the ghost is this scary, like, gonna pop out of the shadows and get you boogeyman, right? So I do like all those extra things, but didn't really switch my gameplay. The one thing that did change for me, though, is when I went to Iki Island, right, which is like the DLC. So if you get the director's cut or you buy the DLC, fantastic DLC. And within it, you get one new combat thing, which is your horse gets the ability to charge. And it uses up, like when you do it, it uses one of your resolves, right? But it is so satisfying to just run over Mongols. So when you're like out riding your horse, going to the next mission or whatever, and there's 3 guys there, I'm like, oh, I'm just going to run them over. And the guys just thud and go flying. It's so awesome.
So trampling Mongols legitimately changed your playstyle at the end of the game.
It did. Because like for those like little moments, right? Because if you're going in, obviously if you're going into like a standoff for, clearing out a camp, you're not riding your horse in. But anytime there is that opportunity to say, oh, I'm on my horse, and then there's 3 Mongols over there, I'm running them over with the horse. Because it was, right? And then you also can find a special horse armor that was like your dad's horse armor, and it basically turns your horse into like tank-looking demon thing, and it's awesome.
That's pretty rad. I did not find that armor. Not a lot changed for me in the back half of the game. The one significant change was I progressed further in the Act 2 story where you get the Sakai clan armor, which gives you a boost to standoffs. So after that, I was pretty much standoffs in almost every single encounter. Like coming up to every camp, coming up to every random encounter on the road. It's like, all right, well, standoff. I can kill 5 dudes at once, and then generally it's not too taxing after that point. What about the abilities that you lock and the ghost weapons that you unlock towards the end? Did any of those make a significant impact on how you approach combat?
Not really for me. I mean, I kind of got locked into using the same couple ghost weapons from time to time. So usually it was the kunai and then sometimes the sticky bombs, unless I was like trying to liberate an outpost or whatever, and it would have the special sort of thing to do where it was like, oh, hey, use this, then I will actually use that stuff. But otherwise, like those like 2nd or 3rd or 4th tier things that you unlock with those, I probably made use of them, but I didn't like cognizantly like go in saying, oh, now I can do this when I use a smoke bomb or whatever. I just never did that. And like the poison dart stuff, other than like when it tells you how to do it, I never did any of that stuff.
I was 30 hours in before I realized how you could actually switch between the ghost weapons. Because like Brian was telling us about smoke bombs on part 1, and it's like, oh, that sounds cool. Like I would love to just start assassinating people in the middle of combat. And like I went in after that, I'm like, oh, I'm still on my kunais. Apparently I just use these forever. Okay, fine, whatever. And then I was like shooting my bow once. I'm like, or I was changing between the stances. I'm like, oh, this is how we do it. Neat.
Yeah, I didn't use the extra stuff, the new things that came out either all that much. I was already kind of using everything, but by the end, it's really the cycling through everything just because I'm out of weapon A, I got to go to weapon. The poisons didn't use, but they were really cool. I will say, like, they are very well done, and I did have a couple fun moments where you get that hallucinogenic poison. And you can like just like, I'm gonna hit this guy and then watch him go through and destroy like 3 of his buddies. So that stuff was fun, but I didn't use it all that often.
So my frustration with that, I only tried to use it a couple of times, so maybe it wasn't like the ideal time to use it, but it just never seemed like the guy actually like did much. He would like be running towards a dude, and then an arrow guy would just shoot him dead. Is the same thing as to sometimes when you'll get into. I think it only is in a few different like outposts, but they'll have like a bear in a cage. And there was one especially, I think it was a story mission where there's a bear in a cage in this place that you're infiltrating. So it's like, oh, I'm going to let this out and see that bear just like destroy the rest of the guys that are here. So I'm standing on the cage and the bear's just standing there. And then it starts running like the other direction. And then my other archers that are with me on my side just kill the guy thing. It's like, okay, well, that was pointless. And I think those bears, when you like wander across them when they're out in the world and fighting a couple Mongols, maybe like once or twice did they actually defeat the Mongols without me intervening, which it felt like the bear should have a little bit higher like success record in that fight. And that'd at least be my thoughts anyway on that.
But every time I ran into that and I saw like a Mongol being attacked by the bear, it was always like the coolest, funnest, like, I don't know about fun, but like it was just so awesome to watch because like that bear is like throwing the Mongol around like a rag doll, and I'm just like, oh, this is crazy. So, and then like, you know, his buddy's like trying to get an arrow shot in to save him, so I'm like, I'm gonna shoot you, and then let the bear finish the job on his buddy, right?
You were very thoughtful about those bear encounters. How about the time you're looking for the archers from Yarikawa, and they're like, oh, they're in this house. All right, you go up, you open the door, and frickin' bear pops out.
Yeah.
It's like,
it was awesome.
Oh, apparently they're not in this house because this was Bear's house.
This was a giant bear. He wanted your port.
Any other thoughts on the core gameplay loop because we bounce on to story content?
No, I mean, for me...
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, for me, it's, you know, it is kind of more of the same, right? I do think when you hit Act 2 and Act 3, the scope starts to shrink down a little bit, especially in Act 3. But it's kind of that same loop, right? Find out where the Mongols are at, find out what side missions you want to do. They're awesome. We'll talk about side mission content, you know, today, but yeah, the actual gameplay didn't shift around that.
But did you guys change your gear a lot? Because I'm just curious if it's like, so like Tom, you mentioned once you got the Sakai armor, you basically just did standoffs the rest of the game. So did you basically set in that one armor, or was it like for different missions you'd maybe switch it into different things? I'm wondering how you guys approach those, and what types of armor did you like the most?
Yeah, I mentioned in the part 1 discussion that I used Traveler's attire a lot. That continued in the back half. Basically, the way this game operated for me, I was in my Traveler's attire until I got close to enemies, and once I started a standoff, I'd quick flip to my Sakai armor, and occasionally, when I wanted to take a more stealthy approach or do more assassinations, I'd switch into the Ghost armor.
The one thing I really like about it is that it's super liberal to allow you to change whenever. It's basically, as long as you can go back to the menu, you can swap out your gear. So there's nothing like getting ready to start a duel, and it's like your legs are in the shot, and I pause, switch out my gear. Hey, I completely changed just in like a split second. But it was super helpful because sometimes you'd be wearing your Traveler's attire, and it's like, okay, well, this isn't going to be great against the Straw Hat Ronin duel, so I better switch into what's going to be better against these guys.
I use pretty much those 3 armors specifically. I'm curious what you guys did with your charms throughout the game, because early on, like, I'd swap out charms to match the situation at hand, whether I wanted to be more stealthy or I needed like more ranged options or whatever. The last 20 hours of the game, I literally didn't touch them. Once I got things that all restored health when I killed or built up resolve when I broke someone's guard, like, that was it, and I did not tweak. It's like, oh, great, I have 100 million billion charms. Don't care. I got the ones I like. I'm good.
Yeah, I mean, I was pretty consistent with how I use them with the armor set. There's usually, you know, if I'm using Ronin, I'm going stealth, so I'm going to add more stealth charms to that. If I'm doing archery set, I want to have poison arrows, and I want to have, like, more concentration so I can get off more shots. But, like, the ones that I always had on were the ones that made parrying easier, right? So that I could do that more, and then anything that would like help me build out some resolve really quick was really good. But there's some like pretty crazy powerful builds I'd use with mine. Like you could do the Deadly Rival attire, right? Which was one of my favorite to wear just because it like amped up your ghost weapon damage. So then you do that, and then you can there's another like charm you get that basically doubles the potency of all your charms as long as you only have one of those charms equipped. So I would have that on. And then basically I was doing like some crazy damage when I'd hit somebody with my kunai. And then also there's a charm that like when you hit them with a ghost weapon, then they're taking more damage from your normal weapon. So I would just mow so far.
Yeah, I mostly, so for the first part of the game, I wore the traveler's attire most of the time, I would say. And then if I had to do like a more of a sneaky type of mission, I would do the Ronin attire. But then once I got the Sakai armor, just because it looked like samurai armor that I wanted to wear more than any of the other armor sets, so it's just like that would be basically what I would wear 90% of the time. If I was going to be exploring in an area, I'd swap to the Sakai armor so that I would get the sort of notification with the little floating, light bug or whatever. It would vibrate when you get close to stuff like Sashimono banners or whatever. I would put that on then, but most of the time I basically wore the Sakai armor until you got the Ghost armor. And then I ended up wearing that in the more stealth-heavy portions later in the game and at the end of the game. But yeah, basically I would take and put whatever that armor was good at, I would find charms and put charms on those that basically amplified whatever that armor was good at. The archer armor I never wore other than like twice. But a lot of the other ones I would switch to here or there. So like there's the... I can't remember what it's called, but the one where you get the mask and it has the big mustache on it. Like that armor, it was one of the legendary armors, I believe. It was really good at staggering, so I would wear that in like some of the duels that I did, because it was just like you could just melt through that earlier phase to just start actually doing damage, so it made some of those duels go a lot faster.
Did you guys?
So those were kind of the ones that I would switch between.
Did you guys play with the the actual cosmetics? Because I know like once I hit endgame, right, like I could basically do whatever I wanted armor wise. There really wasn't that much incentive to like switch. So it started to become like, oh, what looks the coolest and what do I like want to look like? So like I did use like the Ghost armor a lot because it looked just really, really cool. There's even like there's a trophy for like changing like your mask to like the wolf mask you get, and then you put on a certain armor set, and you have like a sword that has like a raccoon look, so you look like Sly Cooper. So like I just did that. Mm-hmm. I was like, oh, that's a cool look, and then you get I looked it up. I wasn't gonna figure that out on my own, but I was like, oh yeah, I'm Sly Cooper. That's so cool, awesome. So then I was Sly Cooper for half the game.
That's funny
because it looked fun.
Is that one of the hidden trophies?
Yeah. But the nice thing about like PlayStation is like you can just go and say it's a hidden trophy, and it's like, yeah, just show me. Like you push a button and it tells you what it is. So I'm like, oh, thank you, because I'm just gonna go search it on Google if you don't tell me that.
And then on top of that, with PlayStation, they have the hints. So with that one, it like specifically tells you, like it has like a couple of different screenshots, and it'll explain like this is what you need to wear, and this is where you get these pieces, because a couple of them are in some really weird spots, and it'll have a video, so it'll show you how to get up to a spot where the one thing is. And so that's really cool for that instance, because then you don't have to go to your phone and look up how to get to this spot. It's just kind of in there in the game hints if you dig deeper into that, which is pretty nice. It's one of those features that they talked a lot about with the PS5, but I don't think a lot of developers outside of PlayStation Studios have really done much with it, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's a bummer. The one thing I wanted to note on the core gameplay loop, the pacing is really outstanding in this game. Like, there's your story missions, and if you just want to Brian your way directly through them from point A to point Z, you can. There's side stories, you can engage with those whenever you want to. There's a ton of like fun, interesting side stuff. And even if you're just like running from story beat to story beat, there's interesting stuff happening on the roads. You'll run into random enemies or bears attacking enemies or God knows what else on the road. And I thought the pacing in this game was really tremendous. Also, somehow my cat managed to shed directly into my mouth, so I'm really struggling over here.
It looks like it. I'm bummed that Brian's not here, because I wanted to ask him if you could actually finish the game without doing any of the side tales. And if you do that, are like none of the people there with you at the end other than Yuna? Because I'm really curious about that. And I don't really want to try to play through the game again to see if that changes anything or not.
Well, I can verify that you can complete the game without completing those side quests, because I looked at Brian's trophy. So, Brian, I know you're going to listen to this, and we love you. There are a couple of the side characters that he did not complete the storyline, so he didn't get the trophy for them. So you can complete the game without completing all of them. I don't know why you would, but you can.
Makes sense. That's not surprising with him.
Yeah.
It is nice, though, that it allows you to kind of mix and match where you want to go or what content you want to do at what times. I will say, though, that it created a little bit of a weird conundrum for me, because then it's like, should I really go through these side tales in order? Because there's a couple of times, and I think maybe we talked about this on the first episode, there's a couple of times, I think like with Norio is one of them, and Sensei Ishikawa is another one, where it's like you'll get like different chunks of them. So it's like with Norio, you have like part 2 and part 6, and you're just kind of like, doesn't it make sense to go through this chronologically? And apparently it doesn't matter because they're like separate sort of tangents of each tale, and they're not necessarily contiguous with each other. So it gave me a little bit of like I don't know, should I do these in order? But then it's just like, I just did it. I just did it in order anyway, just so it didn't cause like a weird thing. But it was a little bit of paralysis for a second, where it's like, I'm right here next to Kenji Part 3, but Kenji Part 2, I should maybe go over here and do first, just in case. I don't know.
I think, though, what saves that, also, though, how quick each one of those little snippets is, right? Mm-hmm. So, and like Tom, you said pacing, right? Like the pacing of even the side content and of those legendary stories is so good, because every one of the little, like, 7 or 8 parts of like a main NPC story, like they're broken down into these bite-sized chunks that is its own standalone thing that like builds into each other. And like it got me into this mode where it's like, I just want to go do these. Like, I just want to finish out all of Kenji's things because I want to see the closing of Kenji's arc. I want to see how this wraps up, because it's just like that next beat where it just brings you in and says, oh, hey, I'm with Lady Masako. I want to see who the person is that like betrayed her, right? I want to like go down that path with her. And they did a great job with those bread crumbs to keep you going.
Yeah, that was awesome. And one nuance of this game that I absolutely adore, you're used to these bite-sized pieces of content. Like each one of those side stories is broken into these small bits that you can get through relatively quickly. Some of the story missions are a lot longer, and the game tells you you're about to begin a longer tale. And like it gives you a heads up, like this is going to be more than what you're used to from it. And like maybe that's not a huge, overwhelming feature, but I appreciate it. It's like, oh, well, it's bedtime. Do I really want to start something longer now? Or the answer is generally yes, but at least I had the option to check out and be a responsible adult at times. So we're talking a lot about side content. John, what was your favorite piece of side content in this game?
So it's really tough, right? I love all the Kenji stuff because it's funny and zany. But, there was just so many other sad moments that kind of hit me in my feels. And I thought about a lot of like the little side quests. Like there's one like, one where it's like the kid's dad is like favors the other brother, and then like you save the dad, but when you come back, the kid's dead and the dad has to bury his kid. Like super sad, right? And impactful as a parent myself. But the biggest one and my favorite one that is also probably one of the saddest is the entire quest line with Yuriko, right? So this is basically, when Jin finally makes it home, he finds that here is the woman that raised him after his mother died. And she's still there, like, protecting his ancestral home, right? And her and, like, one other guy keeping things going. And you go through several quests with her where she's, like, kind of you're learning about her past with Jin. But then as you keep going, and I did all these, like, back-to-back, so I think it probably would have had a little more impact if I would have spread them out. But as you keep going, you start to realize that not quite all there. And she's suffering from, and she actually she had this relationship with Jin's father, right? And then she starts to see Jin as Jin's father. So like they do it so beautifully, where they bring in this confusion, and it hit me like my grandma had dementia, my wife's grandma had dementia, so like very very like close to home. Like I've seen it, and I was like, so beautifully done. And then, like, you know, again, spoilers all about, but like, and then she died, right? She dies in this moment where, like, she's at, like, her favorite place that she used to go with Jin's dad, and Jin pretends to be his dad to, like, make it easy. And it was just, like, this, like, I did not expect that powerful of a story in this crazy samurai game, where, like, yeah, like, you're just on this journey going to, like, these different, you know, shrine cemeteries, and you're fighting stuff along the way, but it's really this moment with, like, Jin and this woman who was so important. It was a really, really high point storytelling.
Yeah, it was really powerful. Burns, how are you going to top that?
Well, keeping it with, like, the really super sad and interesting things. I think some of the aspects that jumped out to me were the immersive gameplay elements. And so we talked already about, like, the Mongols fighting the bears, but there was one really interesting thing that happened at a place called the Shinboku Inn. And so it's in this area where it's, like, in the third area, and there's this forest that's, like, burned down. And I, like, wander across this area where there's this inn, and it says there's this inn on the map, but it's basically these buildings that are just, like, mostly burned to the ground. And I'm standing there, like, looking around in this area, and I keep hearing these, like, boom, boom. And I'm like, what in the heck is that? And finally I turn around and I see that there's, like, these catapult rounds that are flying into the area, and it's like, holy crap, I didn't even notice that was there. And you talk to somebody, they're like, somebody please stop the siege engine. And so I run up there, and kill the guys there and burn down the siege engine. There's something else going on up there too, so I, like, wander up there and clear out, like, a little pocket of Mongols and come back to the town and talk to them, and they're like, hey, take everything here. I'm like, oh, okay, great. And there's a bunch of supplies there. And so I start going through, like, the burned out buildings, and, like, you can climb up to, like, the very top of the roof of, like, the burned out building. And so I was, like, going up there to see if there's anything special up there, which there wasn't. And as I'm standing up there, I realize that there's these, like, few Mongols that were, like, a Mongol patrol coming towards the village. And I start jumping down, and trying to jump off of things without taking damage can be a little bit of a effort and frustration in this game, because if you go up to a spot where you can normally drop down, you can just hit, like, R2. It'll, like, pop up to hit R2 and you just drop down, but that doesn't work unless it gives you the prompt. So you have to try to, like, jump and stay close so you don't, like, miss what you're trying to land on. Anyway, by the time I get down there, these Mongols are full on coming into the town. And so I start trying to attack them, and by the time I kill all the Mongols, they kill these survivors that are in this town. Like, they're just all dead. Like, everybody in the town's dead except for Jin. And I was just like, it seemed like it was so random how that happened. And I don't know if it was, like, programmed to have that happen at that area or not. It just kind of happened, and I thought that was just kind of neat that story kind of built up out of that. I saved this town, and then the Mongols killed them anyway. Crap.
You live by the climbing, you watch the town die by the climbing. It makes sense.
Exactly.
One of the things that stood out to me from the side content, with your main allies, each one has a quest line, which is, I think, 9 points. I thought that Sensei Ishikawa's was really interesting, because the gist of his storyline is that his former apprentice has turned on him and is teaching archery to the Mongols, which is bad. So you got to go find Tomoe and kill her, right? And so you're chasing her all over the map. You watch her jump off a cliff. You end up, like, hanging out with this strange woman in the woods. Turns out it's Tomoe. And then, like, at the end, spoilers, she escapes off of Tsushima on a boat. And, like, you and Sensei Ishikawa just kind of watch her float away, and you go, bye-bye. And I thought that was really interesting, because not all of the allies got what they wanted out of their side quest, or got what they thought that they wanted. And that's just one example of how interesting and nuanced these different tales were.
I think we'll talk about it a little bit more when we get to the side tales, or the Tales of Tsushima, I think is what it's called in the menu. So maybe I'll bottle up what I was just going to say there. One of the other things that I really enjoyed, did you guys do the Undying Flame Mythic Tale? Did you find that at all?
I don't think so. I did the one where you do R1 and L1 for the 3 resolve attack. I did the one where you do like the fast dash attack, and I did the one for Toriyama's armor.
Gotcha. Yeah. So this one, it's in the 3rd area also, and the like what you had to do with that one, I thought was really cool because it was pretty different from like all of the other kind of quests that you had to go through in the game. I don't know. I just thought that was really nice. I don't want to explain it, so I don't want to spoil like what it was for you. And I could see other people like absolutely hating how it's different also. But I don't know. It was super neat to me because it was just like, oh, okay, I'm interfacing with this game in a slightly different way than with everything else. And especially at that like late point of the game where I've played 50-ish hours already, it's like, okay, this was nice to have like a little bit of a palate cleanser. It was hard to an extent. And you know, I would get lost and I'd be like, oh crap, run back to a fire. But it was, I don't know. I just thought that one specifically stood out to me just because it was so unique and different. And since it came so late, I think it was refreshing in that sense. So, that would be like one of the tales that stood out to me, like side content that stood out to me, other than like the haikus and stuff that we talked about a lot in the first episode.
Yeah, and a couple other quick things I wanted to note. I thought the effects in Icky Island were awesome. Like, there's a lot of like psychological stuff going on there, and I thought it looked just visually stunning. I thought the storytelling was maybe a notch below where the main story was, but the visual spectacle made up for it in a lot of ways.
Oh man, I kind of have to disagree with you on the storytelling part. I agree completely. Visually, it looked awesome, but I feel like that story on Iki Island, right, is just as good, if not better, than what they do in the quest, right? Like there's so many cool side story moments where like they bring you into Jin's past, right? And like those are all really cool, and you're seeing like his relationship with his dad, and just the entire story of that DLC of like, you basically have been poisoned and you're hearing this shaman woman in your head the entire time, right? And you don't know what reality is and what isn't. So there's just so many great moments where Jin is fighting things that aren't there or they are there, and he's fighting himself. And I don't know, just it was really, really cool.
It's like Senua's Sacrifice if it was like done with fun combat, right?
Yep.
And I'll say mine with a caveat. Like, I'm only halfway through the Iki Island. Like, I just commandeered the boat and I just finally got my way to get off the island to go mop up other stuff on the main island. But I thought that was really cool, and I think the multiplayer has a lot of potential. I only dabbled with it. I went through the tutorial and ran one mission, but it gives you a lot of different options. Like, there's one suite that's just like story content that you can run with a buddy, and it's all like very supernatural, very stylized, and you're essentially running through these stylized camps, clearing out camps with a buddy or a random, whatever the case may be. And there's also a survival mode where you can go up to 4 players, where you're in different set piece moments from the main game, and you're trying to work as a group to clear them out. There are 4 classes that you can play. Each class levels up separately. You earn essence by completing missions, which you use to buy new skills. There's all your gear to find and upgrade, and it seems really neat, and I'm bummed that we didn't find a time to like get any time into it together. So, missed opportunity there.
And you can't really play that solo, right? It's supposed to be mostly just multiplayer?
I think you can solo it. Like, I should have done one of the 2-player missions solo. Like, you have the option for random matchmaking, or you can turn that off. So you do have the option to run solo, but there's recommended levels. Like, we'll just call them levels. They have a term for it, but essentially, the better your gear, the higher your gear level gets, kind of like a Destiny system, and they have different recommended like gear tiers for each one of those things. So let's just...
Yeah, I know. When that came out, it was super highly regarded. So I don't know. Maybe if y'all have time, it would be fun to jump into it at some point.
Yeah, well, let's just cancel the rest of this podcast and go play some multiplayer. Oh, thanks for listening. We'll catch you next month. Stay inside, kids. Next up, we're going to discuss The narrative of Ghost of Tsushima. There will be spoilers throughout, so spoiler alert, spoiler alert, spoiler alert.
I guess before we jump into spoilers, I'd just say we all loved the game, so you should play it if you're interested in it.
Yeah, masterpiece.
Yeah. I think it's fantastic.
Yeah, one of the tentpole games of the, not even of this console era, of the PS4 console generation. One of the tentpole games of the last console generation. If you haven't played it yet, definitely play it. And here's our spoiler alert for all story content. And thanks for bringing that up, Burns.
No problem.
The basic story of the game is how the ghost, Jin Sakai, survives a massacre of the samurai in the opening moments of the invasion and then pushes back against the interlopers. The first act centers on Jin's efforts to free his uncle, Lord Shimura. In the first act, you meet several key allies and do side story quests with each of them. Then the second act finds the natives marshaling their power to fight back against the Khan, and it ends on a big, decisive, pivotal moment. And then the final act focuses on the final showdown with the Mongol leader and the consequences of Jin's actions throughout, particularly at the end of Act 2. Each one of your key allies, Yuna, Sensei Ishikawa, Lady Masako, Norio, and Kenji, have their own quest line with parallel paths to the main story. Burnsy, how well did Sucker Punch weave these stories together with that main narrative?
So I really think only Yuna's sort of Tales series, I think that's the only one that legitimately ties into the main story, and I think actually that one you do have to finish in order to continue Jin's journey. So the main story quests throughout, and that one is important because that's how you meet Taka, and that's how you get Taka into the sort of main gist of everything that's going on. So it would have been interesting if some of those other tales would have played a much bigger role in the main story. But I did have a question that I wanted to ask you guys about Taka. Is he brave or is he stupid? What percentage do we put on those two things?
I'll put it into terms that John will probably agree with. He's Anna. He's Anna from Frozen. Because, Elsa's got all this magical power and she's awesome and she can go off on these adventures and she can just run across the ocean and freeze everything or run through fire. Anna's like, oh, my sister's going through, so I'm going to run through the fire too. And she's just like a person, just like an idiot person who's going to die. And that was essentially Taka. Jin could do all these amazing things, and Yuna was more than a capable fighter, able to handle herself in this invasion. And Taka's just like this bumbling idiot that's begging to die throughout.
I think, too, what it shows also is how sheltered, in a way, Taka was. Yuna protected him, his entire life. Their backstory is tragic. I mean, we've already talked about dementia. Let's talk about child abuse. And these kids are orphans. And what Yuna had to do to protect Taka from a pedophile that we end up hunting down and killing, right? And it's very subtle when they talk about it, right? You have to be paying attention to be oh, this guy did some bad stuff. But she protected Taka from all that. And now he's in this moment where no, I want to be brave like the ghost. So he is very naive. He's wanting to do these things from a good standpoint, but he just isn't necessarily equipped, right? And a more mature adult would be the way I help is I'm an awesome blacksmith and I'm making you these weapons because I'm not the ghost.
And I mean, joking aside, he took a swing and I have a lot of respect for how he went down and his final moments, and that was awesome. But man, Jin should not have allowed Taka to put himself in those positions. Jin was not an effective leader in those regards because Taka was not a warrior and he was just asking to die through many of the moments that he's on screen.
Yeah, Jin did that a couple times where he's just well, no, they have to make their own choice. He's going to make his own choice and do this. I can't stop it, right? And I don't know if that was him playing, look, Jin was always told what to do. Jin's story of this is my honor code, and I think this is the way we save them. So I think that it actually fits his character to like, it'd be kind of hypocritical of him to come back and say, no, Taka, you can't fight the way you want to fight. Only I can fight the way that I want to fight. Right.
But Jin has a very specific set of skills, and
Yeah.
like he is capable of doing a lot more than Taka. So like he can survive in that environment. I think it's poor leadership to allow your followers to put themselves in a position like that.
Yeah, and to go off of the Taken reference, it's like, yeah, Jin is Liam Neeson, and then it's like his friend James Corden comes to try to help him kill all these people, and then it's like, oh, nope, that didn't go well, did it?
So while we're talking story, just kind of one thing,
I want to, before we jump, I just want to say, I do think inevitably what he did was brave, and really the only thing with Taka is that like he successfully evaded them and like created the diversion. It was just him coming back when Jin didn't come back that was where he kind of took that above the level. And I think it is unfortunate because it is if Yuna hadn't sheltered him so much, he maybe would have been more prepared for the situation that Tsushima was in, at that point in the game. So there is that aspect of it too. But yes, like you said, Tom, the fact that he actually, did what he did at the very end of his life is respectable. So I would say he was 55% brave, 45% stupid.
And maybe Lady Mirako was right in Shogun. Maybe everything is just predetermined. Like we have no agency over anything because Taka had to die. Because if Taka doesn't die, Taka and Yuna go to the mainland, and Jin loses his best and most important ally along the way. So like maybe it was just his fate, and maybe we don't have any agency in anything that we do in life.
True.
Burns, was there another thing that you wanted to go down with the main ally storylines?
No, I don't think so. John was going to segue into a point, though, and then I interrupted him.
No, yeah, it's okay. No, I was just going to kind of say, while we're talking about these, all the different people in Taka and Yuna, I did just want to say that, like, all these stories for all of them were amazing, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's a missed opportunity, I feel. And maybe it's because they had these great characters that were, like, in your crew, right? Like, you did get, like, I loved how, you had this, like, hey, the gang's all here, let's go defeat the baddie, right? You do get that cool moment in the end where it's a little bit of, like, Mass Effect 3 or 2, and you have your whole crew is there attacking and you're seeing them fight. But it would have been, I think, really cool to have a lot of, like, there was such a rich story between all these different side characters, could have woven that together, at least had a little more. And also, can we just pause and talk about, like, how insane the reveal is for Norio and his brother? And, like,
before we get there, let me push back on one thing real quick. Like, you talked about how great it is when the gang's all here and they go and fight the bad, and I agree, but I really enjoyed that everyone was off pursuing their own things while Jin was doing his running between the main story missions, too. It made the world feel a little more authentic to me, because, like, people aren't always just waiting in the hub world waiting for the main protagonist to show up. So I thought it was neat that they were, like, out doing their thing, and I could engage with them when I wanted to, and then they came back for the pivotal moments.
I do think it would have been neat, though, if, like the MCU, you had, like, the drop-ins in some of the tales, and so it's like, oh, hey, we're in this same area, and Norio's here, and he's going to help us with, like, this part of Masako's tale, right? Or a little bit more of a mixing and matching, so they get to kind of, I guess, know each other a little bit more before the ending, when it's like you have the Avengers moment and you're all fighting side by side, through kind of that final area, the first part of that final area. So I agree with John. I feel like if they had a little bit more of just a little bit of a tug into where Jin's journey is going throughout, I think that would have made it more interesting and have a little bit of interplay between all of these, because it's basically like they're all their separate friend groups, and then you have that one awkward party where everybody's there, and it's like they either act like they know each other and just roll with it, or they all just stand awkwardly and don't really know how to address each other, and so I feel like having a little bit of interplay between them all before that would have helped some.
Yeah, if you want to enjoy a moment like that, back Outside is Overrated on Patreon at patreon.com/OiO, and come to our annual summer Patreon appreciation party. John, you wanted to talk about Norio and his awesome reveal in his story. What was Norio's deal?
So, Norio's whole deal is like, his brother was this major spoilers for his story. So again, skip ahead if you don't want to hear this. But like, his brother was this great warrior that died at this battle, sacrificed himself, right? So everyone else could live. Turns out you get to the final thing, right? After Norio has become this new great warrior and defended everything, and you're going and you're attacking some Mongols, and you find your brother, right? And they had basically like chopped his arms off
and legs,
right?
And
legs, right? And like here he and like just been barely keeping him alive. Like just this like gut punch to watch this like moment where like, oh my gosh, like, brother is here, right? Can't believe it, but also like now I'm pretty much I have to kill my brother, right? Because there's nothing left. He's just barely holding on to the thread. Just insane. They went there and like did not see that twist coming.
Yeah.
Or his reaction to that after that.
Mm-hmm.
Where he goes Super Saiyan on a village.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was wild. It was very powerful. I don't have a lot to comment on top of it. It was a really impactful moment in one of the main ally side stories.
So I think my favorite out of all of them, which surprises me because early on I kind of dreaded this storyline, were the Sensei Ishikawa ones, kind of like Tom had mentioned, because it starts off, you got this kind of old samurai that knows everything, right? And so many of these other tales tend to have like this tinge of vengeance, and it's all about carrying that vengeance through to the nth degree. Some more, excessive than others. And it was kind of refreshing to get through Sensei Ishikawa's and have him actually realize that he doesn't need to follow through with that vengeance, and that, it was better, we saved Tomoe from like going fully down the path that she was going down. Now, granted, the Mongols kind of changed their mind with her, it seems like, anyway, before that. But the fact that where all these other things are all about exacting vengeance to the final level, having him like let Tomoe go and like live her life on the mainland, kind of like she mentioned that she wanted to do with Jin. I don't know. I thought that was really cool. And, I'm interested to see. I don't think there would ever be any inkling of, that leading to anything, but it would be neat to see how that played out at some point down the line. But I don't know. I like that one just because of that aspect of it. I think more than the other ones, which, that one actually had kind of a little bit of an uplifting feel compared to everything else just being like, this world sucks to live in, and it just gets more sucky as you go on.
Yeah, I agree. I thought it was really thought-provoking, and like for once, someone didn't have to die to close down the storyline. So I thought that was really cool. Sorry if I stole your thunder with it earlier.
No, I mean, I didn't have to explain it, so it's perfectly fine.
Oh, Lady Mosco's story was also awesome. Her whole family gets murdered, and you find out who betrayed her, and like I thought that was really interesting. She was probably my second favorite ally to run around with. But really, all of those main ally storylines were awesome. Did I miss any of the ones that we wanted to talk about? All right, so second major spoiler alert. Spoilers. This is really the heart of the story of Ghost of Tsushima. The second act ends with a pivotal moment. The Mongols have taken Shimura's castle, and he's sending waves of samurai to die against their defenses. Jin offers to sneak in and poison the Mongols, retaking the castle without losing any additional lives. His uncle, Lord Shimura, forbids it, and Sakai does it anyway. John, was Jin right to defy Shimura and poison the Mongols?
You're darn right he was, man. You know, he saved thousands of lives, right? And like samurai were not gonna stop the other, right? Like it wasn't gonna work, right? And if his uncle would have been on board, right, and said, yeah, you know what, you're right, we need to attack this in a different way. The samurai code is not gonna stop them. They're gonna blow up the bridge. They're gonna do all this stuff, right? Then they could have continued to push the Mongols out together after they weakened. So, like, I think it was completely the right move. Yeah, totally.
Burnsy?
Well, so while I appreciate that part of what made the Ghost successful was that he operated differently than what the samurai did, because Khoten Khan mentions a couple of times that, like, because, you know, the samurai are easy to fight because they all fight the same way. And that was the problem with the Ghost, was that you didn't necessarily know what he was going to do or how he was going to accomplish it. But, like, from that moment where he came up with that plan, I was on Team Shimura, like, instantly. No, this is, like, taking it too far. Like, poisoning an entire camp is just, like, I don't know. It just felt like a step towards, like, evil that was, you know, going to turn Jin to the dark side, you know, and Uncle Shimura had the high ground. And also I think there's so many times, there were some times before that and times after that where you end up in a mob of about as many guys as were in that area when you sneak in to poison it, that, like, you could just slaughter with your swords and your abilities anyway. So it's like, why didn't just do that instead of poisoning all of them?
Well, not even just slaughtering them. Like, I'll say I appreciate saving human life, but it's not like that was the only possible solution. Later in the game, Jin sneaks into Shimura's castle. He sneaks into that same place with all the samurai on alert looking for him. Maybe he should have just snuck in there and tried to stab the Khan, or, you know, find out if Khan's even in that castle and go from there. I'm with Burns on this one. I don't think that Jin made the right choice, and I think that it's interesting how those consequences play out, and we'll discuss those in just a little bit. Shimura made a really interesting point after this pivotal point in the story. Jin still sneaks into the camp, he poisons all the Mongols, and it causes a major rift between them. And at one point, Shimura says, "You taught them to disobey their leaders. What makes you think they'll obey you?" Because Shimura was talking about all these potential problems with Jin's followers, and Jin's like, well, I'll tell them not to do that. No, they won't do this other thing that would be considered evil or wrong. And Shimura's like, well, you taught them not to listen to the leaders, so why would they listen to you? I thought that was really interesting, although I'm kind of stealing it from the end of the game. So Jin's decision has grim consequences. The Mongols learn how to use the poison, and they start using it on the Japanese. As Sakai finds their port base, he learns they've been stockpiling the poison, and they plan to use it in their assault on the mainland. John, can you think of a game where the protagonist's actions have had such dire potential consequences, like potentially thousands, millions of Japanese were going to die because of this poison that Jin introduced the Mongols to?
Yeah, I was trying to come up with something that was on that scope. Baldur's Gate 3 does come to mind to some degree. The decisions there were maybe focused more like to smaller groups until you get to like the ending of the game, where there are some pretty, like, your decisions make some. I think the placement of this decision here, right, and that it's not something that, you know, we can just go back in time and fix, because I've seen that in games too, right, where like, oops, I made a mistake, and the whole game is like me like using some MacGuffin to change everything so the bad thing happen. I think that the way they did it here to actually make that choice really cause an impact, everything was really cool.
Yeah, the only thing I can think of, and I never really played the game, I don't know if you guys have, but Dragon Age Inquisition, my understanding is there's decisions you make in that game that, like, vastly kind of change the world around you, I guess. I don't know for sure how that is or not. But that's one thing that I could think of. But since John mentioned Baldur's Gate 3, I would have enjoyed being able to actually make the decision. So as Jin, before you go and plan your night raid to poison everybody, if you could decide if you were going to listen to your uncle or continue to go through with your story. And I know from from like they basically have to create like an entirely different Act 3 almost to be able to make that work. So that's probably just not feasible to an extent. But also, they did say with the sequel, which comes out later this year, Ghost of Yote, I'd say sequel. It's like a spiritual sequel. It's not like a story sequel. The main character, they said, who is Atsu, her story you'll have more control over the narrative. So I'm guessing some of the decisions you make will actually like impact what will happen down the stretch of the rest of the game. So I'm interested to see how that actually plays out. But yeah, the decision probably was a little bit too big to be able to make and have that completely impact the rest of the game. But it would have been neat to have seen if Jin like, kind of calmed down and was like, okay, yes, we'll do it this way. Or they come to some sort of a compromise where it's like, let's do a surprise attack at night this way. I could do this. Like, maybe that would have been a different way to approach it instead of the poison aspect of it. So I don't know. That would have been kind of cool. It would have been difficult to carry forward the rest of the game as it was, but I don't know. Those were my thoughts anyway.
I just think it's so interesting that this decision has such huge ramifications, and the Khan wasn't even in the castle at the time. So, like, he escapes not getting poisoned. So it's like, oh, well, Jin just basically threw away his entire life, legacy, heritage, everything in the names of defending his people, which is very honorable, but, like, it didn't accomplish the end goal, so what's the point? Like, kind of a big swing and a miss.
It was a Mario moment for him, He had to go to a different castle to find the Khan.
I mean, to even expand on it, like, not only did it not accomplish its goals, right? It made things worse.
Yeah.
Right? Like, so, like, I still think in, like, Jin's moment, like, as right move for Jin, but boy, did it backfire, right? Like, it did blow up in his face because of all the things that happened after that, right? Now you're shunned, now you're captured, now all these things are happening to you, and now, like, giving this weapon to the enemy, they're using it against you, right? And all your fault. So it did add such a good weight to the third story of, like, how is Jin gonna fix the third act?
Mm-hmm. Speaking of the third act, it's relatively short. It thrusts you into melee combat with the enemy leader, Khotin Khan. Was this a fitting climax to Jin's journey?
I think it was. Although you have a duel with him and then he gets away before you can finish him off. And I got into like this huge fight, and I loved like that kind of final big fight on the ship in the game, because I felt like there were so many enemies, and it's like I'm using all of my ghost weapons to try to like find a way to separate guys off so I can focus on killing a couple. And it's like I'm pretty much spent like all of my different like sticky bombs and my kunai, even my smoke bombs I used here and there, just to try to like make everything work. I even tried shooting things with arrows, which is never good when you're in melee. But it did help at one point. I backed off a little bit and was able to shoot like an exploding barrel. But there's this one douche with a shield and a spear that like was just a pain to try to take down. I was like, why is this guy so much beefier than the others? I don't realize until I'm like killing the guy that it was the Khan. It's like, oh, okay, that makes sense then why this douche won't go down.
My experience was a little bit different. Like, I'm on the ship, I'm battling, I'm using all my stuff. I'm like, oh man, I am basically out of resolve, which is how you heal yourself.
Yeah.
And so you build resolve by parrying attacks and killing enemies. And so like the Khan's chasing me, and I'm just like kiting them all around the ship, looking for archers that I can mow down to refill my resolve so I can heal, battle the Khan a little bit more, then kite him around, find some more archers to wail on.
Yeah, and I really enjoyed the fight. I do really like, I kind of had a more similar experience than what Joey did, where I thought it was really cool how it tied together everything, right? Even like the Khan keeps switching his weapon, like, and they do a good job of that throughout the entire third act. We didn't touch on that, but you start, and especially when you get to like Iki and you have different guys there, you start to fight more and more enemies that have multiple weapons. So you actually need to change your stance, right, to the weapon they switched to. And the Khan had a spear. He would switch to swords. Then he would go to his shield, right? And like, I don't know if he was ever classified as a brute or not, but even those three made him really formidable. And just the way that like you fought him and like you took his health down and like there'd be a little beat and like all that, like I thought it was a great like final boss battle.
Yeah, it was awesome. I mean, early on, you're amassing so much power. By the time I hit Act 3, it felt good to run straight for the big bad and, like, unleash everything that I'd been building up on. I thought it was just an awesome climax. So, you defeat the Mongol leader. Like, it's all good in the J-Hood, right? Roll credits?
Yep, pretty much.
Yeah, well, not so fast, Burns. The Shogun has stripped Jin's family name, essentially leaving him as a peasant and ceding his lands to other samurai. Shimura's punishment is that he has to take his nephew's head, setting up a final battle between the relatives. Once you win, you have to choose whether to give your uncle a warrior's death that he's requesting, or you spare him. John, which one of those directions did you go?
So I spared my uncle, right? Like, to me, I wasn't going to have Jim bowing to like this false idea of honor that he really didn't buy into. And I was not going to have him like murder the only family he has left, that basically his father figure, right? Kind of, just because of what I feel like, I think of like a silly honor code at this point, but like for Jen, it's just like, that's not what I believe. My honor is to keep you alive, right? And like, yeah, and if his uncle is that neat, like, wants to die, protect his honor, he should seppuku, right? Like, all right, kill yourself. You lost the battle, right? Like, why are you putting this on your nephew yet again? So, nope, I let him live.
So, this, I got to this point, and you're standing there, and, I don't know, I stood on that scene where he's standing over the uncle for a couple minutes, I think, just really sort of balancing back and forth. So then I did what any reasonable person does. I save right there so that I can play the other one if I don't like what happens. But I did spare him. I don't know. It felt like that was the right thing to do. And then I feel like the way that Jin says, it's where he basically says, because the uncle says, I want you to kill me with honor. And then he sort of turns a line that the uncle said earlier against him. It's like, I have no honor anymore. And then he puts on the ghost mask and walks away. But like I said, I went back and played through it the other way. I would say that the moment is actually that much better and that much more satisfying of a conclusion between the uncle and Jin if he kills him. It's a really neat moment. But it's also neat to see how different that transitions into the end game. So, if you spare, your uncle, you're kind of in this shed in this area and it's like sunny out and you're writing on this stuff. You're like making notes. Jin's relatively happy-go-lucky or whatever. If you kill him, it's actually a different spot that you have a little, like, where your hideout is or whatever, which I thought was kind of crazy that it was a different building in a different area. And it's night and it's raining and you see Jin and he's like sitting on his little bedroll and he just like looks depressed. And when he's talking to Yuna, like he's just like depressed. And it's like, okay, so even though the moment with his uncle like kind of resolved their relationship in a much better way, when you killed him, it's like that's weighing on him, the fact that he actually ended his uncle, and kind of like just, I don't know. And the music transition into the credits is actually different between the two also. I just thought that was really neat that they put that much thought and care into trying to make that a different experience and make that transition into the end game match the decision that you made and how Jin would continue forward after that decision.
It seems like throughout the game they are subtly trying to remind you that your actions have an impact on your mood. Like the way that if you play more samurai, the weather's more sunny. If you play more stealthy, it's more stormy. So I think that's interesting. Bernsey, how impactful was Jin's story overall? What sticks with you after completing this game?
Yeah, I mean, the game was an amazing experience, and I think the story provides a more gray and realistic depiction of like of consequences and the sacrifices that one needs to make in order to do what they think is right. And how like doing what is right maybe isn't always the easy decision or the decision that everybody agrees with. And then there's still those consequences. Like when you're leading up to the duel with your uncle and, you know, there's this one peasant that's like trudging, you know, gets this sort of cart that he's pulling stuck with all these supplies that he's taking up to the ghost because they're going to end up taking a war onto like the Mongols on the mainland or whatever, and Jin's just like, I had nothing to do with any of that. You have to believe me. And so it's like his legend has sort of spiraled out of his control even too, which I think is kind of neat that they threw that aspect into there. And like the line that you mentioned, Tom, I think was really cool of what like Lord Shimura said, where it's like, you know, you've taught them not to listen to their leaders. And so, you know, what is the impact of that? And on a society that was so rigidly built in this way, is that controllable without the code that they created to try to keep that peace, I guess? And so, I don't know. I think it was really neat. It was really interesting. And I felt like satisfied. I also felt it left enough like leeway so that you could sort of think and create sort of what the result is for all of these characters. So what is going on with Lady Masako, you know, now that you've finished her tale, and Norio and all this stuff, and you can kind of get an idea of maybe how they're existing moving forward in Tsushima. So I don't know. I really like that aspect of it. It doesn't have to tell us everything as to the resolution of all of this.
So, for me, there's so much of this game that like just like sticks, right? I mean, I've already kind of talked about some of the major like side quests and that, but, like, you know, it's a game about honor and walking your own path and like doing what you feel is right when you have to face a world and like doing it and the game brings this story to you in a way that's also like fun and challenging, peaceful and serene and bloody and, you know, artistic and like, you know, cute and funny, right? Like there's so many things that I have truly felt like every emotion playing this game, between petting a little fox and like, you know, sitting next to like this old woman as he passes away, right? Like just to me, pure masterpiece by Sucker.
Yeah, I agree. This game made me feel very thoughtful at different points. I've never really gotten attached to animal companions in any game ever, but when they killed Nobu, man, I was upset. I couldn't believe they killed my horse, and then they're like, oh, well, here's another horse. Like, thanks for taking me to the pet shop when my goldfish died, Dad. That's great. I don't want another horse, gall darn it. I want Nobu. Don't kill Nobu.
Yeah, that was a hard moment. And then, like, they have you name him, and, like, he calls out the new name after, like, Nobu saved you. They didn't just kill him. Like, Nobu saves you. It's, like, it's very, very never-ending story. And, like, I mean, talk about, like, a powerful scene, too. Like,
I wish they would have let you name the new horse Nobu 2 Electric Boogaloo, but, you know, unfortunately, they didn't give you that option.
Yeah, this game ruined everything. The ending was such a bittersweet ending. Like, you get a resolution, like, you get the power fantasy of slaying the big bad, right? But then, like, that's kind of poison because you have to have this showdown with your uncle, and, like, you lose, like, everything that your family has ever had. And it's just like, man, it was kind of a downer. Like, I'm glad we won, and I like Jin, and I'm very satisfied with the conclusion, but man, it just, it didn't always feel great.
Anybody else, the first time you fought Lord Shimura, did you, like, not attack and just try to block and, like, get killed and wondered if that would be the ending? But it wasn't. But so I did that the first time I fought him. It's like, I'm not going to hit you, and just tried to block, and he's really hard to block all the time and evade all the time.
Not with Lord Shimura, no, but I did have an encounter like that early on. Like, when I think it's the first mythic tale that you go on, you have to fight, like, that guardian in a duel in, like, that cavern.
Oh.
And I'm like,
yeah,
I'm not going to attack you. And, like, she just comes at you and comes at you and comes at you. And it's like, oh, well, apparently this doesn't end unless, like, I fight back. And it's like, okay, well, shoot. I guess I'll do what I have to do then. John, did you just go straight for the kill?
I did try and parry a few times and then realized, like, no, this is what they want you to do. This is a duel. It's a fight to the death.
Yeah.
Did what I had to do.
It was pretty hard, too. But Bernsey, overall, where does this game shine?
Yeah, I mean, this is the most fun I've had in an open world since Witcher 3, and maybe it tops that. I don't know. It's hard for me. The moment-to-moment gameplay is fun and enjoyable, and, you know, these types of games with combat like this, it's sort of what I felt about when I first played Arkham. Well, I can't remember what the first Arkham game is.
Asylum.
Arkham Asylum, and when I played, like, Spider-Man or Shadows of Mordor. Like, these types of games with combat like this is all about, like, being a really good badass simulator, and this game is a really good one of those. We talked about it before. I'm not sure if it beats out God of War as my favorite PlayStation Studios game, but it's definitely in the conversation. And Tom, I looked up badass. It's not a swear word, so you don't have to bleep it out.
I just wrote down the timestamp and everything, Burns.
I'm just telling you, Tom, you don't have to. It's not a swear word. It's a word that's used as a descriptor these days. It's, language has evolved, Tom. Maybe the game didn't shine in these spots, but I did run into a couple of buggy things. There was one key item in my key items area that constantly kept popping to unread, even though I'd finished that one, like, ages ago. I had one standoff where I killed two guys and then nobody else would walk up to me. So I basically just had to swing and then take my health damage and have to, burn some of my freaking resolve to heal and stuff like that. And I did have some jumping moments where you kind of get stuck in floating land for a while before you can land somewhere if you're trying to, like, scale certain parts of a mountain or whatever. But otherwise, overall, the game is fantastic. On PlayStation 5, it looks phenomenal. And even though it kind of came out in that tweener phase in between PlayStation 4 and PlayStation 5, I believe even, like, the fast travel on the PlayStation 4 version, it was, like, a considered effort that they made with how they built the way the world, like, generates and draws that... because on PS5, when you fast travel, it's, like, super snappy. You're, like, there and, like, the world's there. Even on PlayStation 4, it was super fast also. So it was something with the way that they, like, generated the world and how they, like, created what they showed that was kind of like a masterpiece at that time for design, which I thought was really neat also. So those are, to me, that's where the game shines. In all those places and more.
Burns, would you say that it's better than Elden Ring?
I mean, that's not a fair question because yes,
that's why I asked it.
It's much more of a game that I would want to play. For most of the other gaming population that tend to really love FromSoft games, that's probably not the case. The game probably doesn't push back enough. It doesn't, like, beat you up 80 million times and tell you to go venture around some other random stupid part of the world when you don't know what the F you're doing and try to level up Jin so you can actually take down this first, boss and actually, like, move on with the rest of the game. But I don't know. That's just my thoughts.
I didn't hear a yes or a no there. John, where does the game shine for you overall, and what are your final thoughts on Ghost of Tsushima?
Yeah, so, I've played a lot of games where story is like the best part of it. I've played a lot of games where gameplay is. And to me, where Tsushima really just wins, both of those aspects blend together so well, right? And I think it's just that ability to like have such a fun and intricate combat system and gameplay, right? And have it like lift up the story and match and mirror the story so well, right? Like you truly do feel like you are a samurai, you are the ghost, and I think that is the best thing about this game, because it allows you to put yourself in the world of this character, which then allows you to truly engage in this amazing story that they.
Yeah, I mean, the game's a masterpiece. We just had friend of the show, Mike Mathwig, jump into the discussion. So, Mike, coming in cold, we've discussed like everything spoilery. We were just talking about where the game shines overall. I want to go back to something that we discussed earlier. Do you think that Jin did the right thing at the end of Act 2 when he defied his uncle to poison the Mongols?
Yes, I think he did, but I love the way they treated it. It wasn't a slam dunk correct decision. There were long-term consequences, negative consequences from what he did. And yeah, he took what seemed the expedient route and probably was a necessary route at the moment. But that didn't mean that, it was all sun and roses after that. They paid a price. He paid a price personally. And, I appreciate the fact that they were willing to show that it's not as simple as this is the right decision, this is the wrong decision. This is decision. These are the consequences. You need to deal with those consequences.
And jumping like all the way to the end of the game, we talked about the consequences quite a bit. You have the final showdown with Shimura. You end up defeating your uncle. Did you spare your uncle, or did you give him the warrior's death that he requested?
Oh, absolutely. I gave him the death, and I don't know how you could take the other choice. And I apologize for missing the earlier part of the discussion, but I hope you guys acknowledge that he was not a bad man. He was just a good man in a bad situation that he was not prepared to deal with.
Yeah, we didn't actually discuss Lord Shimura in all that much detail. For the record, we all said that we spared him. Burns saved Scum so that he saw it go both ways.
You merciful monsters.
I disagree. I have no honor, Mike. I'm not going to kill family.
I mean, I sat on that moment for a long time because I was looking at it from that perspective too. Is it's like, if I let him live, is he actually going to be able to keep his lands, or is he just going to get killed by the Shogun's men, or is he going to get exiled? Like, is he going to lose everything too? So I know that's what I was debating when I was trying to decide whether I saved him or not. But I ultimately saved him because I felt like that is what Jin would have done. But I agree with you. Like I said earlier, I was on Team Shimura with the whole like poison stuff and what the plan should be. And it's like, if you don't want extra people to die, then you just need to be a better warrior and kill more guys before they can kill the rest of the samurai. And so I agree with that. And I think the game does a good job of contextualizing the decisions that Jin made and how that complicates things moving forward, not just for, the ruling class, I guess, but just life on Tsushima in general, when it comes to dealing with mopping up the Mongols and moving on to life after that.
And Mike, I think it's a really good point that you bring up that Shimura's not a bad person. Like, that's interesting about that final showdown. It's the two good guys, and like, they're honor bound to have this confrontation, and like, one of them is never going to be the same afterwards because they'll likely be dead. So I think that's a really interesting point that you brought up. And then, Mike, overall, where does Ghost of Tsushima shine? Because you've platinumed this game twice now. Like, you weren't initially super excited to revisit it for this conversation, but you jumped in because of the Icky Island downloadable content that was included on PlayStation Plus. So, like, what drew you through this game a second time, and overall, where does it shine?
Well, as we discussed last time, graphically, it's one of the best games graphically, not so much in a technical sense, although it's amazing in that sense, but it's the wonderful combination of artistic and technical, where they have these wonderful stylized backgrounds and scenery, and yet these tremendously well animated faces and animations. Just it's really a technical marvel, especially here on the PS5 and this director's cut version. The other thing is, I love the way they wrote the side stories and the side characters. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I really loved almost all the side characters that you had multiple missions with.
Yeah, we talked a lot about
I thought
that.
they were well drawn and interesting characters with depth and kind of their own stories and their own arcs.
Yeah, I mean, the game is just a masterpiece, both narratively, gameplay-wise, technically. Like, all the elements of this game come together to be a really incredible package. Anyone else want to give a final thought on Ghost of Tsushima?
I mean, after finishing the main story, I'm definitely planning on going through, finishing the Iki Island stuff, or doing it, because I only did, like, the intro quest for that. I haven't actually, gone past that yet. I definitely get the platinum and try to 100% as much of the game as I can. And I'm also just even more excited for Ghost of Yote later this year now. It was something when it was first announced, and I knew that they were working on a spiritual successor to this. And so, when it was announced, I was pretty hyped. But now after playing through and seeing everything to the ending, I'm really excited to see what they could do with a second one and what they learned with this first game and how much better they can make a second one of that. So,
do you think you'll be like Ghost of Tsushima, where you play the first act and then just set it on the sideline for 5 years until I make you play it for the podcast? Do you anticipate a similar journey?
Probably not, but I guess I don't know what's going to be going on whenever the game does come out and what other things are going to be, on the stove, the stove that is my PlayStation 5 that I'll be playing at that point. So we'll have to see what happens.
What if President Trump manages to successfully end all of civilization? Like, do you think he'll get all the way through the game in one go then, or?
I mean, probably not. I guess if civilization ends before the game comes out, I definitely won't be able to play the game, so...
Yeah, well, here's hoping we hang on just long enough to get to the sequel. John, did you have a final point you wanted to make?
One, play this game. Please do. Right? I think it's a must-play for anyone who has access to a PlayStation 4 or 5, right? Just please pick it up.
Or PC.
Or PC. Also, play the DLC, right? I do think that Jin's story, right, truly does, I think it's one of the best DLCs, not better than Blood and Wine from Witcher 3, and I love Witcher 3. It's my favorite game of all time, and this DLC, truly the story does an amazing job of, filling in gaps of Jin's story and, bringing his entire story to a close.
And let me ask for a clarification, John. How beefy should you be before you engage in the Iki Island content? Because that combat is challenging, because the enemies are going to switch their weapons on you. Like, you need to have resolve. You need to be at least acclimated for, endish game content, right?
I would recommend beating the main, right? I personally, just from a narrative standpoint, I do think that, that's the right way to play it. And I think if you've gone through and you've played through the main storyline, you'll have plenty of armor. Even if you haven't done a lot of side quests and built things up, you'll have plenty of skills at your fingertips there to be able to handle.
Yeah, play the game, check out the DLC. Mike, your final thought on Ghost of Tsushima?
I agree. It's one of those games, if you have the ability to play it, you should play it. And if you have the ability to play the director's cut with the bonus Iki Island content, definitely do so, because it does add a lot to Jin's story, and it actually adds some interesting gameplay mechanics that I hope they take on to the sequel that weren't in the main game. So yeah, it's definitely worth anybody who enjoys, games of any kind really should check this game out.
Yeah, if you like fighting bad guys and leveling up, it doesn't get a lot better than this. For my part, I just can't wait to mop up all the loose ends. They do something great at the end of the game that I like. Once you defeat the final boss, it'll show you where all the Mongol outposts are on the entire island, and when you clear all of those out in an area, it unveils all of the icons on the mini-map, so like you can just run to everything at that point. So like it gives you ways to find all the stuff just by like do the fun stuff first, and then like here's an easy way to mop up. Burns, did you have a rebuttal to that? Oh, sorry, I thought you were leaning into your microphone, so now I'll just stare at you. Yeah. Hi, buddy.
Just leaning, moving around.
Yeah.
Keeping limber.
I mentioned there was something I wanted to put a pin into. It's at the very beginning of the game when you do your first flashback to Jin learning how to use the sword with his uncle as a little boy. And during that, there's just a little exchange that they do that is setting up the entire ending duel, basically, scenario in a way. His uncle asks Jin, what does honor mean to you? I believe is what the question was. And Jin thinks for a second and basically looks at the sword and he says, I think he said something like the ability to defend those who are weak or who need help. And his uncle kind of gets taken aback, and the animation on his face is excellent because you could read in the character's face that he's taken aback. And he mumbles, that's your father speaking. And he's kind of obviously disconcerted because his view of honor, and he says it, is serving your lord and, dying honorably. And that ends up being the crux of their entire disagreement that leads to the final showdown is their differing views of what's honorable and what you should do with your life. And the fact that they layered into this little training montage where you're just concerned with figuring out what button does what in combat is so clever and subtle that, first time through, I didn't make the connection. It was only the second time playing the game that I'm like, holy crud, I just realized what they were doing with this exchange.
I wonder if that's something that they added at like the last minute once they knew like all the story beats and how it was going to end, and it's like, oh, well, we have this cool interaction where you learn how to use the sword. Like, this is a great opportunity to foreshadow. I just wonder when exactly they decided to execute that foreshadowing.
I agree. I would love to ask somebody who was involved, when they decided and how they decided to do that, because that's the kind of thing that you just don't see very often.
Well, that wraps up our discussion, our 2-month discussion, or our 2-part discussion on Ghost of Tsushima by Sucker Punch. We'll be back next month to start our discussion on Armored Core 6 Fires of the Rubicon by Burns' favorite studio, FromSoft. Mike, you have already beaten Armored Core 6. John, you are 3 chapters in so far, and it sounds like you're loving it. Like, how fired up are you guys to talk about Armored Core 6 on the show?
Extremely.
I hope I stay awake long enough to actually, be at the start of that discussion this time.
Yeah, we'll see. Maybe we can start that one earlier. We'll see. I think it'll be a really good discussion. My biggest concern is just that I'm going to suck at the game and not be able to make as much progress as I want, but I guess we'll see. I hope you'll jump in and play Armored Core 6 Fires of the Rubicon with us. Please support Outside is Overrated at patreon.com/OiO. And until next month, stay inside, kids.